We have new information on efforts to shake up the Republican presidential race. Wednesday's debate without former President Donald Trump pushed some of the country's biggest GOP donors to try and bring a new contender into the campaign. Robert Costa was first to report this. Bob, who are they eyeing? What's going on?
Good morning. Good to be with you. Some major Republican donors are trying to get Virginia's Governor Glenn Youngkin to think about running for president. Now, it's nearly October, and the clock is ticking for anybody thinking about a late entry, but this is happening because there's dissatisfaction that some of the current contenders will be able to break through and really take on former President Donald Trump as he continues to have a tight grip over many of the Republican voters across the country in terms of their support. Now, there would be logistical hurdles should Youngkin decide to get in after the Virginia legislative elections in November. Many ballot deadlines for the major states are in December, so it would be a rush campaign, to say the least. But there is alarm inside of the Republican Party about what to do at this moment if you're an anti-Trump Republican and you don't really see anybody, at least at this point, becoming a breakout star.
I think it's a very interesting choice. Now, if I recall Youngkin's successful run in Virginia, what he managed to do was be Trump-like, but also simultaneously distancing himself from Donald Trump. And the thinking at the time was this may be the new kind of Republican candidate that Republicans need to look for. That if you could just replicate Youngkin in other places, then it would be sort of everything you want without the Trump. But then that didn't really happen. Is that what they're hoping for when they float his name for this?
That is such a good point, because we did see in 2022 during the midterm elections, many people in the Republican Party were essentially copying what Youngkin did in Virginia in 2021. I remember going to different campaigns on the Republican side to cover them for CBS News, and the candidates would be wearing their own fleeces, their own sweater vests, and talking about things the way Youngkin talked about cultural issues and education and conservative economic policy, the same way Youngkin did in 2021. Youngkin was seen as a model for 2022, especially in how he embraced Trump voters. He worked to win over the Trump coalition, but he kept Trump himself at arm's length. He didn't have Trump come to Virginia. So there's a thought in the donor class inside the Republican Party that Youngkin could win over Trump voters without having to be Trump himself and wouldn't be seen as very Trumpian or a Trump copycat. But as we've seen in this presidential race so far, it's very difficult to win over Trump supporters if you're not Donald Trump yourself.
Yeah. Now, I also thought that what many were waiting for was for the field to get smaller, so that some of these candidates who had one, two, single digit, were polling in the single digit zone, that they would sort of get their votes to go to someone else. And finally, we would have an actual race. So adding someone else to this party seems like you're just sort of delaying what we're all waiting for, which is to find out exactly who will be facing off against Donald Trump.
And there is frustration that some donors continue to talk about Youngkin being an idea, because that means their money and their support is not going to those who are currently in the race. And there's sincere interest among many top Republicans that Senator Tim Scott or former Ambassador Nikki Haley or the former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, among others like former Vice President Mike Pence, can break through and become a consolidated candidate who has consolidated support in that anti-Trump faction. But time is of the essence at this point. We're at the 11th hour, politically speaking, and until someone really starts to catch up with Trump, and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis for months has been at the top of people's list in the donor world as someone who could do that. Until someone really breaks through, you're going to likely continue to hear people talk about Virginia's Governor Glenn Youngkin. And as he has this so-called Red Vest retreat in Virginia Beach in mid-October, you'll probably hear more about it, and more about it in November, if Virginia Republicans do sweep and win the control of the General Assembly.
So listen, while we have you here, I got to pick your brain about something else. Monday morning, a new trial is going to get underway in New York. The Attorney General's civil fraud lawsuit against Donald Trump, his sons, their companies, and other executives. Can you sort of talk about what we can expect Monday, how this is different from the court decision that we just heard about, which concluded that Donald Trump and his companies participated in fraud for many years?
This is going to be something to watch because it's different than the 4 indictments Trump is facing on a criminal level in different areas of the country, federal, state. This is about Trump's net worth and how he has characterized it in the past. And politically, the impact here could be intriguing because it gets to the core of Donald Trump, someone who was on The Apprentice for years on reality television, talking about his net worth as billions and billions of dollars. And there's an accusation here, an allegation that he overinflated his assets, he overinflated his net worth, and that, in a sense, defrauded people who expected him to have that kind of value, that kind of wealth. And so Trump is someone who is so casting himself all the time, going back decades, as someone who's very wealthy. And this could raise questions through the process of a trial about just how wealthy he really is.
All right, well, it's going to be another interesting one. Bob, thank you.
Thank you.